It's happening,
Yeah.
which is, I suppose, frightening depending on how you look at it, whatever your perspective is. I know a lot of landlords are worried about it, but
2 beds is definitely the sweet spot because you've got...
what do you think is going to happen to that? Because rental in advance is being abolished, essentially. You can't do it.
People always think London constantly does that, which obviously it can't forever. And probably the last 8 years or something, it hasn't gone up.
An interesting theory of an 18-year property cycle. I don't know if you've heard of
Okay.
that, but that there's an 18-year cycle from boom to bust.
And you don't have the 90-day restriction that we have in London.
But at least for now, it is a good time to invest because you can get really, really good rents.
They were going up year on year, but I'd say probably this summer they're about what they were last summer, so they're not still increasing, they're about the same.
Often what happens in London then filters out
Yeah.
to the countryside and to the cities outside of London.
The other misconception about landlords is that they're all super wealthy.
Hi there, I'm Jack. Welcome to the next episode of the Flower Property Podcast. I run Flower Property. We're an estate agent here in Bath, mainly in the Bathwick area, and we do residential sales, lettings and property management. And today I'm joined by Leah. She runs LMA Property. That's an estate agency in southwest London. Leah, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, yeah. Well, I started LMA 10 years ago. So I went straight into property at 19, didn't go to university. Half my life in property, I won't tell you how old I am. But yeah, started LMA after working in various estate agents for sort of 9 years. And yeah, we're based purely in southwest London, so based in Fulham. We do lettings and sales and property management, but we're probably sort of 80% lettings to 20% sales, I'd say. Yeah.
Nice. And so what prompted that initial leap then? You said it's been 10 years with LMA and you were 9 years before working for other agencies.
Yeah.
What made you kind of take that leap of faith at that point?
Actually, so I went and did law part-time. So yeah, a few years into estate agency, I thought, actually, I want to be a lawyer, as you do. So I went and did my law degree part-time and my barrister school part-time whilst working for big estate agent that we both know. And then I left to get more legal experience. But I set this up as plan B, sort of thinking I'd go into law still, but I actually enjoyed this so much that I never went back to law. So yeah, and the rest is history.
Okay. So it wasn't necessarily set up with an ambition of, I want to create an agency which is going to become a really flourishing business, but it naturally grew and then you're here 10 years later.
Yeah.
At what point did you feel this is actually going to be what I want to do and commit to this rather than it just being something to cover costs whilst you were studying law?
Yeah, good question. So property management was my background. So initially it was just a property management company. And then landlords, organically just started saying, well, why don't you let our flat too so that I don't have to go to 2 different agents? And then eventually, why don't you sell it too? So I've always wanted to know exactly what I'm doing before I go into it. I'm not one of these people that sort of run before I can walk. So yeah, I've organically learnt it. Added all the bits in, employ someone now. Yeah, and I love it.
And so then, rewinding back to 19, that first decision to go into the world of property, was it something you think you actively wanted to go into? Did you fall into it as so many of us do? What was your kind of decision process as that 19-year-old looking for that first job?
My parents moved house around that time, so dealing with solicitors and estate agents, yeah, I did think, okay, property might be quite interesting. But the first job was actually an advert in the Evening Standard newspaper. This is how long ago it was. For a family-run company in South Kensington, so they did everything. I got experience in all aspects of lettings. But when you then go to a bigger estate agent, you have to obviously pick a department, and I picked property management. So I'm more customer service based originally rather than... I didn't want to work on commission. That was it. That was purely it. I didn't want to work on commission, so I went for property management and yeah.
Well, it's interesting saying, I'd be interested finding more about your training and the first job you had, but you're saying, my first role was in property. I didn't want to be on commission. I wanted that sort of stability of a salary that I knew I would get each month. Yeah. But then you go and set up a business where you're completely into the unknown and you're relying solely on the income you bring in, essentially commission. They seem like opposites almost to have those two perspectives.
Yeah. My partner's always been quite ambitious and sort of said, you can do it, you can do it yourself. I was the more cautious one, I guess. But no, I get maybe because it was so organic, that I sort of did it slowly, that I felt more comfortable with it, I guess. I don't know. But I love the lettings now. I love the deal, the the viewings, the negotiation, all the bits I thought I wouldn't like, I actually really enjoy.
Yeah. And with the setting up LMA, in terms of that growth, how did you experience it? You know, because we're a business which has been going for 18 months now, and it's very much that phase of just trying to get any business in you can, survive and keep going. What was the journey like for LMA in terms of where it was just getting that business in, trying to survive, and then it became more of a flourishing business with business coming in? How did that journey go at LMA for you?
I got one big client, I guess, fairly early on, and that was my first leap into lettings. So yeah, I did property management, as I say, just property management at the beginning. And then I got a client sort of came up to me thinking I did lettings too, and I didn't, but I used it as a good opportunity. I thought, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I know enough about it and learned, did a lot of ALA. It was in, property market courses and whatnot. So he just assumed he was moving from a high street agent who he was fed up with, and he gave me sort of 12 properties in Fulham. Like, there you go, let those for me. So, and that was my first step into lettings. So I guess that was a bit of luck, a bit of fortune. So that was through networking. So I get a lot of my clients through networking and word of mouth. Yeah.
I think that's the case. I mean, that's what we've experienced in the first year. Is it's just about keeping your ears to the ground, keeping those connections, those networking events, which introduce you to that one person who then might give you one thing, but then there's 10 things which come off the back of it. You know, we've had that recently with a developer client who I've probably been seeing at networking meetings for 18 months pretty much since I started, and now there's 7 units which he's going to give to us to sell, which is great.
Nice,
but
yeah.
you have to keep those relationships over a longer period of time before that business comes right.
100%, yeah. And it's sort of the difference between lettings and sales, isn't it? Lettings is so quick and fast paced, and sales is a lot of nurturing, like you're saying, which I'm learning more to do. And yeah, they're very similar, but they're very different at the same time, I think.
It is different. I mean, my first experience of agency was in lettings, and it is much faster paced. As you said, it can be in a week even or less, where you get the instruction to the tenants moving in and collecting the keys. So the whole process is super fast, and I really do enjoy that. So I like having as much lettings as possible. Sales, especially if you're working with a developer, as I'm sure you'll know, it might be that you meet them now and they're just going through planning, which could take a year, it could take longer, and then the actual development can take 18 months. So it is really about nurturing those longer relationships.
Yeah.
So it's a very different kettle of fish. I think you've got to have a lot more patience on that side for that side of the business to grow, whereas, as you said, with lettings, it can happen really quickly. So going back to that first job, was that first job Douglas and Gordon? Was that somewhere else before you then went to Douglas and Gordon?
I was at two different ones before Douglas and Gordon. So the first one was small family-run company, South Kensington, lots of student lets, lots of sort of HMO type things.
Yeah.
Then I went to Frank Harris and Company. They're part of Jackson Stops in the Barbican. So all those lovely Barbican flats. That was very cool. And then Douglas and Gordon for 6 years.
Yeah, because I mean, my first job was Douglas and Gordon, and I know it's obviously changed now, but it was really good training. It was a good place.
It was great. It was great. Yeah.
But I feel like even though estate agents are obviously much bigger, London's a much bigger place, agents seem to know each other more, and there does seem to be more collaboration in London with other agents than there is out here. I mean, you haven't experienced both markets, but I do feel like everyone knows everyone in the agency world in London. I mean, we've spoken about loads of people who we both collectively know, even though we've never worked together. Whereas here, I think people it's slightly more in their own bubbles in the agency world, and they've got their own company they work at, and there's not so much collaboration with other guys. I don't know, do you find that you collaborate much with other agents? There's much you'll pass across, or?
Somewhat. Some are very old school, as I guess you'd call it, in the insular. I would have thought it was more like that out here because it's such a small city in comparison to London. I'd have thought people would cross paths more and sort of want to be on each other's sides more than competitive.
Exactly. And that is completely what I expected as well before moving out here. It's a smaller market, there's less properties, less opportunities, and therefore surely collaboration is needed between the agents dealing with those smaller number of opportunities.
Yeah.
But that's not what I've experienced. I've tried a few times to reach out to other agents if I'm struggling to sell something and say, look, if you've got any buyers for it, let's split the fee, I will do the viewing, and there's just not that perception here that that's something worth doing. for
That's
whatever
interesting.
reason. Whereas
Yeah.
when I worked at Savills in London or Douglas and Gordon, we often would work with the other high street guys, and if they had something which we thought our applicant would suit, we'd see if we could do a split, and
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 that people were up for it. That is quite different here.
Yeah.
I suppose that leads us on to what we're going to talk about through most of this episode, which is about your local market and what it's like there in southwest London versus here.
Yep.
So probably is worth starting with you talking about your local market, what's happening at the moment, what's 2025 been like. Tell us more.
Cool. Yeah. So southwest London, basically Hammersmith and Fulham, Kingston and Chelsea, Wandsworth, that kind of area. Generally, it's good for lettings. Quieter this year for students, definitely, international students. So Earl's Court's a very big, say Earl's Court, South Kensington, all that sort of bit, very big cohort of Imperial College. So a lot of foreign students, and just far fewer coming over this year, which is interesting. I think they've put the fees up or something. I think there's external factors, but although Southwest generally works as a whole, there obviously each individual bit is quite different still, and you've got some very expensive areas and some less expensive areas, but Earl's Court, for instance, has got so many rentals. So I think at one point we had there were 65 2-beds to rent in a quarter mile just in SW5, which in the summer that's unheard of. You know, they all go to students in that time between July and September. Whereas somewhere like Balham, I had one in Balham, went just like first day, 3 viewings over asking price, you know, because there weren't so many there. So although Southwest London is pretty similar across the board, it does still have those very specific areas. And you've probably, well, maybe not, you probably don't have so many new builds around here, right? But if we get pockets of new builds like Nine Elms, there are so many rentals to choose from that it pushes the price down.
Yeah, it's not so much of a thing here. Obviously in the city centre it's almost impossible to do new build. All of the city centres are UNESCO World Heritage Site. A lot of the architecture here is Grade 1 listed, so it's almost impossible. But there are areas where there is lots of development. So most of that's happening on the Lower Bristol Road, which is basically kind of just the south side of Bath, the other side of the river. There's a lot of that is purely student stuff, so build to rent but specifically for students. And there seems to be the demand for that because they're just building more and more and more. And actually on the rental side there's a real shortage of supply in Bath, so even though there has been quite a lot of new build stuff on that side along the Lower Bristol Road, I think a lot of it's been owner occupier. You don't see a huge amount of it come up for rent, or often it's a second home purchase as well. So it's a holiday home, which they'll visit a few months a year, but they don't want to rent it out long term, so they need that access. So the lettings market here is still very, very competitive and everything's renting quickly. So going back to Earl's Court, you're talking about 65 beds in that small radius. Have they all sort of let now, or is there still a lot of stock sticking around which isn't letting in that area?
There is, usually you get to October and that's it, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
But no, there were a fair few, because of the new rental reform bill, I don't know if we're going to get onto that later, but a lot of landlords tried to sell, so there was a lot of ex-rental stock, and then they kind of realised there's too much on the market, so they can't sell, and it's come back on the rental market again. So I think that was why there was also another huge influx of rental properties on. They missed the student market, and they're kind of sticking. And yeah, the good stuff rents. The average stuff, landlords could often get away with just keep renting and not having to do it up in between. That's not so much now. Yeah, the good stuff goes. The average stuff kind of sticks around a bit.
Yeah, I think that's the way everywhere, isn't it? If you've got a really high quality product, a really nice property to rent out, it's fairly market resilient, right? Because there's always people who need to rent, and so the best quality stock will go first. But then if there is that excess stock, that's where then the less nice flats stick around and don't let. That is always why you should, if you're a landlord, have a really good quality product, so you'll get the best tenants, and you'll also always be able to rent it out, and usually tenants who look after it. So on the Renters Reform Bill, actually, which is a really interesting one, which it looks like it's going to get royal assent fairly soon and pass into law. Oh, really? Well, there we go.
They don't know the implementation date, but it got the royal assent.
So it's happening, which is, I suppose, frightening depending on how you look at it, whatever your perspective is. I know a lot of landlords are worried about it, but specifically for you, talking about the student-let market, a lot of that market for the overseas student is a year's rent paid in advance.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen to that? Because rental in advance is being abolished, essentially. You can't do it. How are those tenants going to get those properties if they don't pay the rent in advance? What do you think?
I don't know. There are multiple options. Obviously, for my clients, I've been getting the rent up in advance up to this point to, get us as far ahead as possible
almost.
in the next
Yeah.
year. Yeah, which students are happy to do because they tenants don't want to keep moving either. The new act obviously lets them leave at 2 months, with 2 months notice at any time, but most of them don't want to flit around. People want to be safe and comfortable, and that was the whole point of the bill to start with. But because they're going to have to give the 2 months notice, students that have in their minds that they've got this flat for a year and then they go to leave in August have to be given the notice in June. And if they forget, they're going to be tied in for another, till September, October, whatever, technically. I think they're either going to have UK-based guarantors. I'm sure there'll be more schemes pop up, kind of rent protection insurance or whatever, that landlords are going to insist upon. Or just, not take, they won't take people that don't have it, basically. But eventually, if enough people don't have it and they can only take a month up front, then I guess landlords are going to have to do it, aren't they? They're going to have to accept it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what pops up. I think definitely on the guarantor side, a lot of them won't have any UK-based guarantors, right? So they don't have that option to then use a UK-based guarantor to pass references. But I have heard of some schemes where a scheme will collect the rent a year in advance and then they can guarantee the rent and pay it monthly that way. So it's actually whatever that guarantor scheme is collects 12 months, which is fine because it's not a contract. They're just paying the rent to that guarantor scheme and then they will pay month by month to the landlord. So
there'll always be new businesses that find ways.
There's a way to get around it. I think that's it's just about looking at those sort of creative solutions, right, to the issue. And I think there's always that demand. There's a way of dealing with it. And I think if you take the right steps, you get someone very good to manage the property who knows what's happening, is on top of it. You should be okay. And I think there's opportunities as well, right, because so many landlords did sell in anticipation of these changes. At least for where we are in Bath, there's a real shortage of supply off the back of that. So rents have risen by so much that it's a good time to invest, even though there's these changes. So
were they not bought by other landlords then? They were bought by first-time buyers and things?
Not massively, no. So there's been a real drop in the supply of stock on the letting side. So there is a shortage, especially in Bath. So that's presented an opportunity now. I think there are, in my experience, just anecdotally, more investors coming back into the market, more buy-to-let landlords saying, I want to buy up now and rent out. So they are coming back into the market slowly but surely. But yes, for a good few years, it's been them exiting but not entering, which has just meant the rental prices have gone up so much. It's been over 10% a year in Bath for the last few years, just because there's that shortage of supply, but there's still that tenant demand, and so prices are really rising. And that will balance itself out eventually. But at least for now, it is a good time to invest because you can get really, really good rents. And we do have a big student market here, but I think there's less of an international student market than there is for like Imperial College, which in my experience when I was working there, it was a lot of international students who were renting around there. Whereas here it's a lot of UK-based students, so they do have those UK-based guarantors. And so the changes matter less on this side because I'd say the majority of the student lets we've got, they are paying monthly rather than yearly in advance. And they've got, a parent or guardian who's a guarantor.
Yeah.
So going more broadly beyond just student lets that we've spoken about a lot there, have you seen any changing patterns in your local market in South West London? Anything that has changed in particular that you've noticed?
Not massively, apart from, as we were just saying, that the average stuff is not going as much as it used to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, most of our stock is pretty decent, obviously. But yeah, you'll have the cheaper ones that perhaps they're not so bothered if it's not tip top, but at least they get it for a nice price or whatever. It's near the tube. That stuff's sticking around much more than it used to, definitely. I think we had a little bit of everyone wanting outside space at one point, right? But that seems to have tailed off a bit actually, and people seem to be back in the office a bit more, so they care a bit more about, again, being back close to the tube again. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, those things, there's always demand for outside space. People will pay a premium for it on a rental side and a sales side, right? But I do think, that COVID period was especially when people said, I have to have that and that's a deal breaker, and I won't consider something which doesn't, maybe in a way that I think it's the same here. They're not as focused on those things now because they're not locked inside the house the whole time, so it doesn't matter so much if they've got that outside space and things. So then if you're kind of putting an investor's hat on, and you were trying to advise an investor for your area on what sort of stock they should be buying, stock which is going to rent well and have good demand, what would that be?
I always say 2 beds. 2 beds is definitely the sweet spot because you've got the spare bedroom from a 1 bed that'll either be, you can have 2 sharers, someone with a couple with a baby, someone who wants a home office. It's much better. Much more flexibility. And then when you get into 3 bed territory, we have a lot of licensing in London. I don't know about you guys, but each council has their own licensing. And you think of HMOs as these big sort of 5-6 bed houses, but in a lot of the boroughs in London, it's from 3 bedrooms and above. So it's not much different. It's all the certificates you need to have anyway, but then it's an extra sort of £1,000 for the council for no real reason. And just a bit more confusing, and it's harder to let probably because you've got to find 3 sharers and they've got to all get on, and they've got so you always get one that swaps out and all that sort of thing. So 2 beds are the sweet spot. I still like traditional properties personally over, and most people do, to be honest, over new builds. And like I was sort of saying earlier, not too near areas with a lot of new builds, because then you've just got way too much competition for renting it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similar advice you'd give here. On the licensing front, isn't it right that there are some boroughs now in London where any property has to have a licence? So is that anywhere where you work, where you've had that?
A lot in Hammersmith and Fulham. They've got a list of about 20 streets in Hammersmith and Fulham where even if you've got a studio flat, you need a licence. So I've got Fulham Road, King Street, mostly high street, main road type. I think the idea was to capture the sort of shops above flats, flats above shops that were probably less well kept. Think that was probably the thinking behind it originally. But I've got a landlord with 5 flats in one building on Fulham Road. They need 5 licenses, even though they're studios and 1 bed flats. So it's just, you just have to keep doing that every 5 years, which is fine. We do that for them, and that's another service that we do for them. And like I say, it's mostly just the certificates you already have, so it's not...
It's a landlord tax, essentially, isn't it? I think it's just a way for the council of generating more income. It's funny because often what happens in London then filters out to the countryside and to the cities outside of London, and that did happen in Bath. They did bring in additional licensing, so you have just your basic HMO licensing for 5 beds or more, which still applies everywhere, but they brought it in for a while for 3 beds or more as well here, and then they got rid of it a few years ago, and I'm not quite sure why, but they got rid of it, so it may come back again. And I think you have to just be aware of that, and it's why, as long as you've got an agent who's on top of it, they can make sure that you're compliant.
Because it's huge fines if they... there's no excuse for ignorance, so they'll still, just because you didn't know that you're on this one street for 1 bed flats, it's, huge fines.
And do you find that there's a lot of open rent, people who do it through open rent in your area, or that's not so much of a thing?
Not really. No, that's interesting. Whenever you're doing research, I don't know if you find this, they'll often be cheaper. I don't know, so you'll sort of be doing research and you'll find that Foxton's ones are more expensive because they've obviously said they can get more. You'll get the whole average in the middle, and then you'll get the open rent ones that are cheaper, and I don't really know why, but and dodgy pictures, but so no, not many landlords do. They tend to go, in my experience, tend to go for a proper agent and knows what they're doing. Do you have a lot of open rent around here?
It's the biggest agent in Bath. So
really?
If you're on Rightmove Plus and looking at what your biggest agents are for BA1 and BA2, open rent is the biggest. It's got like 13% market share. It is the biggest agent. Obviously, it's not an agent, in terms of where people rent through open rent, it's the biggest. I think it's now the biggest agent in the country as well for lettings. It's pretty big. Maybe Connell's Group is still bigger, but it's very close. So there are some people who do it, but again, I think in my experience at least, we would say this as agents. The premium that you can get rent-wise and the quality of service that you get should outweigh the cost of bringing in an agent, I think, in terms of hassle saved and hopefully the rent that you can generate for them.
Tenants too. I know one or two tenants that like open rent specifically because they want to deal directly with landlords, but most of them say, I don't want to deal directly with a landlord, I want that professional in between us. And they'll call the agent rather than the open rent.
I can see that,
listing.
Wanting that degree of separation, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't have to go straight to the landlord, that you're dealing with an intermediary.
And they just think it'll be
People
looked
like
after better, I think. Yeah.
And then pricing, we'll go into sort of more average market prices for your area, etc., what's happening on a pricing front. But I'm just very interested, you mentioned Foxtons and their pricing, and that you're talking about overvaluing, that they will often come in with a premium to landlords and vendors as well, I assume. Is overvaluing a problem in your area? Do you experience that there's lots of agents who do overvalue, or is that not so much of a thing? It'd be really interesting to hear how you perceive it where you are.
I think they're probably, because the sales market's not great at the moment, I think they're kind of realising they can't get away with it so much. But I was looking at the average prices. I was looking through the Zoopla listings before I came to see you, and the amount that some of them have been dropped, is a whole price of a property around here. They've been dropped like £400,000 or £450,000 because they just can't shift them. I always say to people, like to clients, you might work with yields and KPIs and whatever in your own job, but you don't think of it in terms of an estate agency. You don't think about the fact that they're trying to get you on their books. That's their first target. So they will tell you anything you want to hear. And that includes, saying that you can get way more than you can get.
Yeah.
And then they'll shove anyone around your property as a viewing just so they can tell you they've got loads of viewings. They might not be interested in that property at all. But they can say, I've got 10 viewings for you today, The client doesn't realise that they're never going to buy the place or never going to let the place. So we're very, like you are, customer service based rather than sort of targets driven, I think. And we price it to sell or let. And then take people around that are genuinely, likely to actually want it, because we don't want to waste our time or their time.
Exactly. I say exactly the same thing to clients, which is, I'm going to give you a price which the property will sell at, and a strategy which will help it sell, because there's no point in me telling you something which is unrealistic and then we don't sell, because you don't sell and you get no money, and I don't sell and I get no commission. So what's the point? We're incentivized by getting the deal over the line, rather than some agents do have KPIs where they've got to get a certain number of instructions on a month, so they will give either a really cheap fee or a really high price to just win that instruction.
Exactly.
And so a lot of people aren't aware of that.
No.
I know there's been the Panorama episode which came out, which I think sheds a little bit more light on what happens on that front, but a lot of people don't get it. And I think they trust an agent. When an agent comes in and says, you can get £600,000 for your home, but it's really worth £500,000, it's very hard as a person not to emotionally attach yourself to that number. And then when other agents are telling you the realistic price, even if you kind of understand the logic behind that realistic price, you've still got that level of emotional attachment to that higher price. So
you see it as pessimistic more than realistic.
Exactly. And it's very difficult to then uncouple yourself from it. So,
well, Fulham specifically has been £1,000 a square foot for about 8 years.
Nice.
And it's like, agents are so lazy, they will literally look at a floor plan, times it by 1,000 and give you that figure. They won't even come and see it. They think they don't. But that is very much changing now. Yeah. So we had one on for 2 million. It was 2,500 square foot. Should have been 2.5 million. So we had it. We were down to under £800 a foot and 2 viewings in a month. He ended up renting it instead. So it's changed a lot.
So there's been that much. That it'd be good for you to tell us now then about sort of what prices are, what average price per square foot is, where that movement's been as well. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it still depends on the type of property.
Right.
So I think agents just can't be as lazy as they used to be in the valuing. Done property. So this was a very much done, ready to move into property.
Right.
Maximised, the biggest one on the street because it had been fully extended, everything. And it rented really easily when we came to rent it instead. But the sales, it just, as I say, hardly any viewings. Whereas we've just sold one in Putney, which was probate, needs full refurbishment. That's around the £1 million mark. So, obviously a very different market. Sort of first time, believe it or not, first time buyer type house in London.
Very good first time buyer.
Yeah. So it's first house after buying a flat, that kind of progression. But they can do it how they want it, and that's it. So there are a lot of people that are buying, properties where they can make their own mark on it, not so bothered about the ones that are all already done. I think a lot of the ready done to move in market in southwest London has always been European, and there aren't as many of those coming over, obviously, at the moment. Or they come and rent for a long time. Stamp duty. I mean, we could go on for hours, obviously, but stamp duty for over £1.5 million is what, 12%. You can rent a property for 3 years for the price you would pay in stamp duty in Fulham.
Yeah.
So why would you buy it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of, especially with the prime market and more expensive properties where that stamp is so much, if you are going to be here for a finite period, a lot of people don't understand why really wealthy people will rent somewhere which is 50 grand a year even.
Yeah.
But when you've got stamp duty bills which is several £100,000, then actually it's more affordable to do that for a few years versus buying.
But I think a lot of people don't realise that, because a lot of people, I think probably still traditionally, a lot of people that come and live in Fulham, southwest London, they're in finance, so they're very attuned to what they could be doing with that money rather than paying it in tax. I mean, I don't know, what's it like here in Bath in terms of average prices and...
Yeah, again, obviously it's an estimation. There can be a big variation in the price per square foot based on location, street, quality of finish, etc. But it's around £470 a square foot in 2025. So takes you to about 565 in terms of your average house price here, 565,000. And actually what's interesting is the average price for new instructions this year in Bath is 616,000, whereas the average sold STC price is 565. So it kind of suggests a little bit of overvaluing, where agents are overvaluing the property and it's selling for less than what it's on for, but also that the more premium properties over £1 million in Bath, are really struggling to sell. So that entry level first time buyer market up to 500,000-600,000 is busy. There are people who are buying, but for the more expensive homes and the second home purchase market, it has disappeared. And I think that's really due to uncertainty, people waiting to see what's going to happen in the budget in November before committing to a big purchasing decision. We were just speaking about stamp duty. It might be that there's going to be a big swing in what their potential property tax costs are post-November. Yeah. So why buy now when you might be paying less next year? So that's really kind of tied up that top end of the market. And it sounds slightly similar to what you're saying. You were talking about some of the more expensive listings, £2.5 million at £1,000 a square foot, but actually ended up selling not even at £800 a square foot, 2 million, and renting out. So I think it does seem like, I don't know what you're seeing, but that top end of the market or the more expensive properties are struggling to sell more than perhaps your more entry level 1-2 bedroom flats are.
Yeah, people always think London constantly does that, which obviously it can't forever. And probably the last 8 years or something, it hasn't gone up. Like literally, that sort of market. And given that inflation's been, 20% a year, some of it's sort of down 42% in like real terms. Which is scary. But I've got a client that's got sort of 12 buy-to-lets, and he asked me to value them for sale just out of interest because of the rental reform and whatever. Yeah. He didn't end up selling it. But and I had no idea what he got as a value 8 years ago because I wasn't involved with him then. I gave him the same prices as he said. That's what it was valued in 2016. I said, oh, well, yeah, it's the same.
I think a lot of people haven't recognised that that there has been. It's an over-exaggeration, I think, to call it a property crash, but there has been, in real terms, over the last few years, a big drop in property prices when you factor in where prices have stayed flat, but inflation has gone up, that actually the prices have dropped. But there's an interesting theory of an 18-year property cycle. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that there's an 18-year cycle from boom to bust. And obviously the last big crash was 2008. And so we're basically at that 18-year mark now. So hopefully it won't be a full-on crash, but there has been a real reduction in prices against inflation, a silent property crash, as some people call it. And I think that hopefully is coming to an end, and then we will go into a market where there's growth after this time of the hidden reduction in property prices. Fingers crossed, at least.
Well, I think people always relate everything back to Brexit, right? But the year before Brexit, we had a potentially Corbyn coming in. So even a year before that, Fulham was very stagnant because they were worried about mansion taxes. They were worried about, So it's been, like I say, a good 8-9 years or something, I'd say.
Yeah, and so then moving on to the letting side. We were talking a little bit earlier about yields. Obviously, that's what landlords are obsessed with for obvious reasons. What would they look like in your area? What sort of yields can landlords expect to achieve?
Yeah, you'd think it'd be going up given the sale prices are going down. Rents have probably stayed the same in the last year-ish, very roughly, obviously. So they were going up year on year, but I'd say probably this summer they're about what they were last summer, so they're not still increasing, they're about the same. 3 to 4% is a good yield in southwest London. Kensington and Chelsea, you're looking at 2 to 3%. Obviously, it depends on the property. Service charges are huge in a lot of these blocks, so that eats into your profit a lot. If you're fully going to take into account all of your expenses, but it should be getting better given that the sales prices are coming down, right? So it should be meeting in the middle a bit more. But I don't know, what's it like here?
It's better. I think your yields are better. Definitely, it depends on what sort of stock you're looking at and your appetite to risk. Traditionally your lower yield stuff is lower risk, and that's part of the reason why it's lower yield. So I know there's been big drops in prices in places like Chelsea, but traditionally it's a low yield because it's a fairly safe investment where you can expect capital growth. And so there is kind of that same range of yields here. They start probably a little bit higher, but if you're buying a 1-2 bedroom flat and renting it out, can probably expect between 4 to 6% as a yield for the city centre of Bath. That's a pretty stable yield. Around 5% is, I would say, the norm. But then if you are looking at a slightly riskier investment, like an HMO or a student let, you can get towards 8, 9, 10% if you find the right property. So there are really good deals to be had where you can have really good yields. It just depends on your appetite to risk. You can buy something bog standard, a nice 2-bedroom flat in the city centre, and get 3.5 to 5% yield maybe, but there's not really any issues. You'll have probably working professionals renting it. They'll just pay the rent each month. You don't have to worry about it. Or you can invest in a student let in Oldfield Park, where most of the student lets are. There's going to be a lot more admin unless you get someone to manage it and they do the admin for you, and more risk to an extent, and perhaps not the same level of capital growth there versus the city centre, but you could get 8, 9, 10% yield. So what you go for and what yield you get kind of depends on where you're looking to invest, what your appetite for risk is, and what your appetite for hassle is. How much hassle do I want to take on? And then the best yields of all, if you can find the right investments, are your holiday lets. There's a huge holiday let market here in Bath. You're staying here in Bath for the weekend in a holiday let. So it's a very popular tourist destination. There's 6 million tourists a year who come to Bath. So there are a lot of tourists looking for places to stay. Bath has a population of 91,000, so it's not that many houses, but there's a lot of tourists who come here. And so if you can find somewhere where you can do a holiday let, a lot of the buildings here won't allow it, that's where you can really maximise your yield. Your costs are way higher on holiday lets. You pay 20% to Airbnb, and your property management costs are probably another 20%, but your income is that much higher. It usually generates the best return. So a lot of the investors we've got specifically look for holiday lets only. They say, I only want to buy a 2-bed flat in the city centre, which can be used as a holiday let, because it generates the best yield.
And you don't have the 90-day restriction that we have in London. So in London you can only Airbnb for 90 days a year.
I didn't know about that until today, until you told me. A lot of people Airbnb at 365 days of the year, or they might have it as a second home where they book it out for a month and come and stay in the summer or at Christmas, and they rent it out for the rest of the year. So maybe that restriction will come in soon, which will be quite frightening for a lot of people who have big holiday let businesses here and rely on that income all year round to cover costs. But as far as I'm aware right now, you can just through Airbnb rent it out the whole year with no issues.
Do you find though that the Airbnb market is taking a lot of properties off of the long let market?
Potentially. I mean, as we were saying, there's that real shortage of supply in the long-term let. But I think what does balance that out a little bit is that there's very few buildings, because most of the flats here are leasehold. Sometimes they share a freehold. There are a lot of head leases which prevent holiday lets, which specifically say if you rent out the property, you can only rent it out for a minimum of 6 months or longer. That's what the vast majority of the leases say. And so I think there are a lot of long-term lets which are kind of protected from becoming holiday lets because the landlord can't rent it out as a holiday let. They just physically don't have that capacity to do so. Or maybe they'll do it and break the rules and try and get away with it. So I think that protects it a little bit. I think the shortage of supply in the lettings market in Bath is more to do with that fear about the Renters Reform Bill, about changes. COVID affected the market a lot, and so people sold then. And I think that's where that shortage of supply comes from, as opposed to the holiday let side of things. At least that's what my perception of it is, but it's probably a combination.
Which like everything, I guess.
Impacting that.
So
we're going to move on as well and talk a little bit sort of about the architecture and the area. So where you work and live, tell me about what the building's like, what the architecture is like in that area.
So we're a lot of Victorian and Edwardian. My house is from 1890 in Fulham, which is quite nice. But people love the old buildings. I mean, obviously over the years, the houses have been split a lot of the houses have been split into flats or maisonettes. A few years ago, people started switching it back. So I'd say probably 15 years ago, people were deliberately buying in houses and splitting them into flats. And then 5-6 years ago, they started doing the opposite and having like a nice house again. So yeah, Hammersmith and Fulham, Wandsworth, all of that area is a similar sort of era. And people just, resist new builds quite a bit, I think, to get a nice old building. We don't have Bath stone like you though, but
no, sadly,
and not so much. We have some listed sort of what do they call it, conservation area, where there are certain things you can't do, but I think yours is far more restrictive around here.
Very restrictive, yes, but it's a very
in a good way.
Unique and beautiful city which needs to be protected.
Absolutely.
So it's predominantly Georgian in the city centre of Bath, built in the 1700s.
So it's even older,
Yeah, so most of it is between 1710, 1720 through to the very early 1800s. That was the real renaissance of Bath, where it was kind of reborn as a really successful, flourishing city. Was founded as a Roman settlement. Aquae Sulis, it was called, when it was a Roman settlement because of the hot springs here. And then fell into being a very, very small, tiny town through the Middle Ages, through to the early Georgian era. And then Queen Anne came in the early 1700s and it became very fashionable. And then through that era, through the Georges, it was super popular. And that's what most of your architecture is here. Georgian, Palladian style architecture. Beautiful buildings.
Nice. Yeah, stunning.
And then it kind of died off then in the Napoleonic Wars happened, late 1700s, and then Britain ran out of money fighting those wars, so it didn't have the money to invest in. This was essentially like a Las Vegas of the 18th century, where everyone came to spend money, to gamble, to go to the theatre, to party. That's what it was, and that's what this town city centre is. That's the story of Bath and its architecture. That's great place. So the next section that you said we should talk about, which I think is an interesting one, is talking about the misconceptions which perhaps clients or just the general public have about your job, where you work. Are there any misconceptions in particular which you think people have about your line of work and what you do or what we do?
I think there's a mixture of things that we've probably touched on a lot of them. Misconceptions that rents are constantly going up, that rents are really expensive. Okay, they are expensive, I guess, in a way, but relative to the property price, they're not. And, it's owning a property and letting it out is a business decision for a lot of people. And now they can make far more money just putting that money into stocks and shares. So why would landlords, they're not sort of ripping off tenants to get as much as they can because there's a ceiling. Obviously, the market sets itself. Like, you can only get the amount of rent that people will pay for that rent. You can't charge above market rate. No one will rent it, will they? So if you can get sort of 7% in stocks and shares, which, as I've just said, we can only get 3% if you're renting it, there are much better options out there. Things can't always go up. So, as I say, they've tailed off. What else? I was thinking, I don't know, that's kind of the main things. Yeah.
I think, but putting an optimistic spin on the yield side of things, obviously yield is a part of what you should focus on as a landlord, right? You want to see what's that income that I generate, the percentage yield of the value of the property that I get back each year. But you also want to look at capital growth. That's the other fact. You know, it's
But that hasn't gone up in 8 years either.
It hasn't.
So
but
yeah.
I
Inland.
don't think that, you know, if you look historically over the last 50 years, the trend has been for prices to continue to increase, except for these blips and these cycles that you have in the property market. So I think there will be a period where those prices will go up again and you'll have that capital growth as well as the yield that you're generating. And I don't know if that will be strong where you are, but I feel at least locally that now is a good time to invest because prices have been flat against inflation. So there's been a real terms cut in prices. But if you invest now, whilst it is a better time to buy, it is a buyer's market, then you can capitalise on the time where invariably it will become a seller's market at some point and prices will increase.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you have a long-term perspective of investment in property, the trend is upwards. You know, even if it is 8 years of flatlining, if you're holding the asset for 10 or 15 years, you should make a good return.
Yeah, yeah.
At least that's my optimistic
Yeah,
way
no,
of
you are
looking
right.
at it.
I think a lot of the other misconception about landlords is that they're all super wealthy, and you know, the government at the moment obviously wants to take more money off of them. But most of my clients they're not super wealthy. It's a flat that they had when they lived in London, and they've now moved somewhere like this or back up north where they're from or whatever, and they've kept it because once you've got a property in London, you keep it if you possibly can. Probably to their detriment because they've probably had to pay the extra 3% stamp duty on their second home, and they're keeping it to give to their children. So most of my landlords are more emotional, you know, landlords rather than pure investment landlords. So yeah, they haven't all jumped ship.
Yeah. Do you have portfolio landlords as well? People who, you know, it's just an investment and they've got a whole series of properties that they let out, or is it mainly, as you said, those accidental or emotional landlords?
I've got a couple of portfolio landlords, who want it all with. I think because we don't have a strict postcode restriction, they can give me things in sort of Balham, Fulham, you know, and they've got one agent that can do all of it. Yeah. So that's the benefit for a portfolio landlord if they're in a few different postcodes. But most of them are, attached to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, interesting.
Yeah.
I think, there's a mix here as well. I do think with the legislative changes, there are less of those accidental landlords. A lot of them are exiting the market. As you said, returns are less good. Admin and red tape is much more than what it was before. And so with the hassle, they're thinking, well, why don't I just, as you said, stick it in a stocks and shares ISA instead of putting it down as a deposit on purchasing a flat to rent out. So there will be more, I think, and more of portfolio landlords who stick in the market and they've got enough properties to generate a really good return in income, as opposed to the person who lives in a flat and manages to save up enough to buy somewhere else and then rents out that flat that they used to live in. I think you'll see less of that perhaps than we did before.
Well, as a nation, we're obsessed with home ownership, aren't we? So
we are.
That's always what people are aiming for, when in reality, like we were saying, people that aren't here or aren't in one place for too long, they might be better off renting for 2-3 years until they decide where they want to actually buy.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
And moving towards the end, because I'm just keeping an eye on the time for us, putting your sales skills to the test. You know, you are an estate agent, so you've got to be able to sell things. Where you live and work, pitch it to me and tell me why it's a great place to be.
Okay, well, I never thought I'd end up in Fulham, actually. I grew up in Essex, so when you don't live in London, you think the whole place is like Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus. You think it's all just mad and busy. Fulham is very green, very family orientated. It's well connected to the centre, but also well connected to places like this. We're right on the A4, the A3. Easy to Gatwick, easy to Heathrow if you want to escape. We've got the river right on our doorstep. We've got a lot of parks. We've got Fulham Palace, which is amazing. District line, the tube, for those who don't know. Yes, it's expensive, but I think that means generally the area is very nice. It's very well kept. People got a good community going. You know, that's the other thing about London. It can be very transient. People don't stay for long. They don't get to know their neighbours. But actually, Fulham is very community orientated. The house I mentioned that I sold in Putney, which is literally across the bridge from Fulham, that street has house parties all the time. Street parties all the time. They all know each other. They have street parties for every sort of royal occasion. They had one the other day because 4 of them were turning 60 within the same 6 months. So it's a proper old school kind of community in this area of London. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Nice. Yeah, well, I mean, I used to live and work around that area, so
You know
I
it
can
as
vouch for it
well,
as a
yeah.
nice part of London. I
Yeah.
think living in London wasn't for me, but the closest to finding somewhere which I did enjoy living in London was in that area.
Yeah.
So I can see why it's so great. Do you think you would ever leave? You would ever move out of London or ever leave the area, or you think you're there for life?
No, I don't think we're there for life. I'm not really a city girl at heart. I very much like, when we go on holiday, we always go as few people as possible. Well,
Nice.
I don't want to see anyone for 2 weeks. Maybe that's the antidote to living in London. But I love mountains. I could do without a beach, but I love mountains. I'd like to live somewhere near the mountains. I like the States, actually, because it's such a mixture. You know, you can kind of see why Americans don't leave America, because you've got from Hawaii to Alaska to Arizona, like you've got everything there. I mean, I think it's near on impossible to move there, visa-wise these days, but that would be the key, the goal, I guess, ultimately, when I get older. But no, I do love Bath. I kind of forget how close it is to London if I ever need to get back. It only took me an hour and 20 minutes on the train. And I love old towns. I love, the old architecture.
Yeah.
And it's a lot quieter here.
It's wonderful.
How did you
Wonderful
end up
place to
out
live.
here, though? Have you got connections from family? Or?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
My dad's from Bath, grandparents are from Bath, so growing up, grew up outside of Bath in Hampshire, but would always come and visit grandparents, come to the area.
Nice.
Big Bath rugby fans, we'd always go to the Rec and watch the rugby and then stay in the city. And it's just such a wonderful place to live.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantastic. It's got everything. You've got a compact enough city centre with great cafes, restaurants, bars to have everything you need, but then you can walk out into the countryside very easily along the Kennet and Avon Canal or up Barthwick Hill or along the cycle path to Bristol. So you can escape into serene, quiet, peaceful countryside, but you've also got everything you could ever need in the city centre. The shopping's great, the food's great, the cafes are great. Yeah, it's brilliant. I wouldn't look back. It's great. And if you do need to get into London, which invariably you do sometimes, I've still got friends in London, it's super easy to get in on the train. So yeah, if you are ever moving out, I recommend considering Bath as somewhere to potentially move to.
Absolutely.
So final question for you, split up into 2 parts. Looking ahead in the next 5 years, where would you like to see LMA property go in the next 5 years? And personally, where would you like to see your own journey go over the next 5 years?
Interesting. We're actually looking at a high street presence. So actually that's sort of exclusivity to you. No one else knows about that. So yeah, I've been looking at shops in the borough, potentially good spots. So 10 years we've been online, sort of didn't think we needed a shopfront presence, and we haven't to this point. I think we're out and about at properties. We meet the clients at the properties, so a lot of reasons you don't need that. But I think to get to the next stage, the next step, I think that will be where we're going to go. Yeah. So
Great.
That's a lot. That will take up researching it, developing it, and just getting that right brand and that right look.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then personally? Anything in that personal journey that you want to happen over the next 5
No, well,
years?
that's kind of tied in with this, because I was very much, recently been thinking, like, what do I actually want to do? I created a job for myself rather than a business, to be honest. That's what it was. I love doing this. I'll do it for myself. Why not? It grew and it grew organically, and I love it. But then I just thought, but what can I really focus personally? What do I actually like doing? What are my hobbies? And it is business. I love it. I'm thinking about it. It's probably the same as you, at the weekends, in the evenings. So why not, put that effort into actually growing it rather than just maintaining it? I think that's where I kind of came up with this. Thought, okay, maybe that's the next step. Yeah.
Great. Perfect.
What about you? Tell me. 5 years, you're a year and a half in, so 6.5 years in. What?
You know, similar trajectory to what you said, I think, in terms of what we would like to do. Whether or not we have a high street presence, I don't know, but I think we would like to have a bigger office. Have just taken on first employee as such, which is my brother, so we've now expanded to a team of 2. I think would like to grow to at least 5 over the next few years and build up a business in Bath which can sustain itself, and then you can take in a sales and lettings manager to run the Bath office once there's the business there, and then look to potentially expand and try and go out into the villages south of Bath heading towards Frome, where I think there's a loft opportunity really. There's a lot of Cotswold agents. Cotswolds are super popular, a lot of Bath agents, but there's not so much of a premium agent presence in that Somerset area south of Bath, so I do see an opportunity to expand there in the future. So really it's just about building up Bath as a successful business and then trying to slowly but surely expand it out further over time. But I think you've got to have patience. I'm quite an impatient person.
Yeah, same.
And I want it all to happen tomorrow, but that is going to be 5 to 10 years for that journey to happen and for it to grow. And choosing the right people to join, creating the right team, that's the frightening part
100%.
Because I trust myself, very much trust my brother, of course, but then once it gets further, it's about choosing those right individuals who will help that business flourish and help Flower Property grow. So that's
amazing. We've done
that's the
amazingly
dream.
in the first 18 months. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up? Anything else in particular you were burning to say?
Not really. No, not really. Do you?
Great. No,
Any
not at all.
ideas on the budget? No. Any?
Well, I mean, it's all speculation, right? I think there's going to be rumours, as there has been, about stamp duty being abolished below 500,000, above 500,000, stamp duty being changed to a property tax paid over a certain number of years. I think there's a high chance that might be the case. Potentially national insurance contributions on rental income is one which they've suggested, which I think is perhaps less likely. Who knows? I think what the government has done, and that we know for a fact they have done, is floated these ideas, see how they land, and see how the general public responds to them. And if it's not too bad a response, they may implement it. So there are so many rumours flying around, and it's guesswork, I think. I think there's likely to be changes. Well, there will be changes because they need to bring in more tax income somehow. But how exactly that will manifest itself, I mean, it's anyone's guess. But the thing which is certain is that there will be changes. I think that's why people are waiting until November before committing to that next big purchasing decision, of which buying a house is a massive decision. Great. Well, Leah, thank you very much for coming along, for visiting Bath and joining me today. And looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Good. You'll come to London.
Definitely. Good. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.